Hi guys, welcome to True Crime Wine Wednesday Halloween edition. If you're new here, hi, hello, welcome. I am Sherrilyn and I am so glad you found me. That is usually much more animated with my head and my hands, but right now I'm scared my head's gonna fall off. That's what she said. If you're not new here, welcome back. Thank you for joining me every single Wednesday. Wine or no wine, I just love and I appreciate you and the fact that you are here with me every single Wednesday. Although today we are uploading on a Friday. I think this has to be my favorite Halloween look of all time now. I do Marie Antoinette almost every single year, like to some capacity. Usually though, it's like some sort of like skull. Last year I did it headless, but I've never done like a natural version. And now I just want to wear this all the time, every day. Do you think I can? What are you guys being for Halloween? I'm gonna start a Facebook group because it's been on my mind for a while. I want a space where we can interact more, where you guys can interact more and like build relationships, because you guys already kind of are doing that in the comments, but there's nowhere to like really on the daily see each other talk, ask for advice, and that's kind of the community we're building, and I love it so much. So I want somewhere where you guys can go, you can share things like your makeup looks or ask questions or Halloween looks or your family or whatever you want to do. I'd also like to pop on some lives and hang out with you guys on there too. So I'll leave that link in the description if you guys want to come and hang out. Okay, riddle time. A serial killer kidnaps people and makes them take one of two pills. The victim got to choose which one. Whichever one the victim took, the serial killer would take the one left over. The victim took their pill with water and died, while the killer survived. How did the killer always get the harmless pill? I can't wait to hear your guys' answers. Even if they're wrong, I always love what you have to say. It's always so fun, so don't be shy to share. I love them all. Before we get started, Sherrilyn has a message for you. Thank you to our sponsor today, Shudder. Listen, I cannot tell you how many hours I have spent on Shudder leading up to this upcoming Halloween. If it's old school, cheesy horror, I'm there. If you don't know what Shudder is, it's a streaming platform that is literally designed for us Halloween horror lovers. The entire library consists of anything and all things spooky, and although they already have the biggest library out there of any streaming service for all things scary, they're constantly updating, keeping it fun, adding shows that are just specific for Shudder. Right now they're doing 61 Days of Halloween, where their own shows, Creepshow and VHS 94, have added new seasons, as well as a new special from Elvira, which I jumped on. I have to admit, I never watched Mistress of the Dark. I don't know what was wrong with me, because now it's added to like my comfort library. I'll literally watch it all year round now. It checks literally every box for me. It's old school, it's funny, it's a little spooky, super cheesy. It's everything you could ever want. Another thing that I have to do every single year is watch Carrie, and usually I want to try to PVR it so I can watch it a few times during the season, but I find that every single TV provider, like all the channels, they never played until like Halloween Eve or like 2 days before, so I can only watch it like once or twice. But I've been able to watch it several times already because Shudder's got it, and it always gets me in the mood every single year. Another one that I just found that I'm binging like crazy is the newest season of the Boulet Brothers Dragula. So fun. In a nutshell, Shudder is like the Netflix of horror. For only $5.99 a month, you can watch it on any device you're working with, whether you're iPhone, Android, Roku, Amazon Fire Stick, Shudder's got you. If you are a horror buff, you will not be disappointed. Get started streaming the best horror, supernatural, and thriller content. Shudder's expertly curated collection includes must-see titles like Vicious Fun, The Mortuary Collection, and PG Psycho Gorman, plus all the best horror documentaries and the hit TV series Creepshow from executive producer Greg Nicotero of The Walking Dead. To try Shudder for free for 30 days, go to shudder.com, SHUDDER.com, and use my code Sherrilyn. Once again, that's SHUDDER.com and use my promo code Sherrilyn. Let me know what you're watching. Are you going for like old school scare, cheesy horror, something new, a little bit of like column A, B, and C? Where are we at? Thank you again so much, Shudder, for having us in the Halloween mood all year round and for sponsoring today's video. Without further ado, let's get into it. Grab your drinks, grab your snacks, your bubble bath, your regs, your keyboard, your keys. Some of you guys listen to me while you're driving, which is fine as long as you're listening and not watching. Okay. Today's case takes place in Edinburgh in 1828. One of my favorite places in the world. I could literally go multiple times a year if that was possible. The area we are focusing on today is the Old Town section near Edinburgh Castle. If you haven't been, it is so amazing. You just feel the history like at every turn. Every step, it's all like cobblestone. So just to be there and feel like you're walking the same path that others have walked in for thousands of years, the feeling is indescribable. You especially feel that so much when you go through the castle, which is the oldest standing structure in Edinburgh. The oldest part of the castle is actually St. Margaret's Chapel, which I've stood in. It's very, very, very tiny. And it dates back to the early 12th century, which is just crazy to process. I've even stood in the room that Mary Queen of Scots gave birth. And like, that is just mind-blowing that like these structures exist and these places go and we can see them. I'm so disappointed in myself for not knowing about this story before though, because I would have loved to look out for some of the places that are mentioned. And even, you know, like taking peeks around some of like the closes that are like the alleyways and like wonder if that's where these men stalked their victims. Another thing I didn't know about Edinburgh was that it was the place for medical training. If you wanted top-notch learning and to be like a state-of-the-art doctor in this time, Edinburgh is where you went, which I mean is great for them, but when you have students coming in from all over the world wanting to receive top-notch training, you need the supplies to be able to do that. When I say supplies, I'm primarily focusing on cadavers. So what started happening that the higher ups in the medical school started turning a blind eye to was that a lot of lecturers started taking matters into their own hands and found cadavers of their own by buying them when they were being dug up from graves, which seemed to do the trick for a while. I'm sure you know where I'm going with this. As morally wrong as it already was, there is only so much supply that can sustain the demand, and there started being stricter security at the graveyards. And soon, a world-renowned doctor took the jump from associating in the grave robbing business to cold-blooded murder. Dr. Knox was born on September 4th, he was not born in 1971. 1791. Big difference. His father was a well-respected man. He was a Freemason, and he was also a lecturer in what is known now today in Edinburgh as the Royal High School. There he taught philosophy and mathematics. He and his wife had 9 children, and Robert was 8 of 9. When Robert was young, he almost died from smallpox, but he was able to pull through. But because of it, he was left with severe scarring for the rest of his life, and he was also unable to see out of his left eye. Kids are dicks. They were dicks back in the day too. They would call him things like Cyclops. So he focused his attention on just doing really well in school. He went to medical school in Edinburgh University in 1810, where he specialized in anatomy and graduated top of his class. The following year after he graduated in 1815, he joined the military. He was there for 5 years and he performed as a surgical assistant, so it's said that he was able to get a lot of hands-on training, and this is what really kind of like kicked it up for him and catapulted him into being one of the top surgeons because he had so much experience. After leaving the military, he went to Paris for another year to just even enhance his skills even further, and then after that, he came back to Edinburgh. I guess he married a woman named Mary, and they had 6 children, but he kind of kept them a little bit of a secret. She was what others considered not on his level, so to like keep his reputation top notch, he never brought his wife or kids anywhere. Which is so rude. He quickly became one of the most sought after anatomy and physiology lecturers for aspiring students. He was filling up classes of over 200 students a day, 2 times a day. And that was when he just first started. One of the things that really drew people to him was that they got to see a full dissection in person. As the word spread that this was the type of caliber of education you could get here, the demand just grew. His classes were filling up from 500 to even 1,000 students that were taking his class, which is all fine and dandy, except for back in the day, there was only a limit that schools could have to the amount of cadavers that the government would let them have. And there was also one condition that needed to be met, and it was that the cadaver needed to be a viable candidate. So the number of bodies they could only use were 6, and the only bodies they could use were criminals who had received capital punishment for their crimes. which actually deterred people from wanting to commit crimes, like understandably. People believed that if their body was dissected, what would happen is that they would roam the earth forever trying to find all of the missing pieces. So they didn't want to go there. Teaching-wise, when you're filling theaters of 500 plus students and you're only allowed 6 cadavers, those numbers don't add up at all. It wasn't openly advertised that they really needed people to pull through and bring them some subjects. But there were certain people who knew that they, on the down low, were looking for bodies. It sounds like a lot of the public knew this was happening, but they also saw it as, okay, well, having people seek out education here is great for our country. So they didn't really kick up a fuss or bring a lot of attention to it, demanding for it to stop. Part of rolling with it too, sadly, was that they would outsource these bodies in poorer neighborhoods where they knew that no one was going to be able to win any pushback. The flip side to that, though, was that if you were from a poor family and you were okay with donating your loved one to medical research, you could be paid, or if you wanted to receive medical training, you could do so in exchange for a body. It sounds like Dr. Knox was one of the main ones who had his assistants on the streets, making it very clear that very minimal questions would be asked if a body was brought to them, and that they would be paid handsomely. I mean, desperate people will do desperate things, and 2 friends were no exception when they found themselves at the back door of Dr. Knox's medical school with a body that literally presented itself to them at one of their homes. And when they saw how easy it was to make money that they had never seen like that before, they created more money-making opportunities for themselves. When I say created, I mean just straight up started killing people left, right, and center.
He's climbing in your windows, he's snatching your people up, so y'all need to hide your kids, hide your wife, and hide your husband, because they've been everybody out here.
William Burke was born in Uri, Ireland in 1792. His family was said to be poor, but very respected in their community for all that they did. He was described as a little nugget. He was 5'5", a little round-bodied. Apparently, he was quite the dancer. He was very good at the Irish jig. Those who knew him really liked him. He wasn't a star or popular or anything like that in his town, but there were people who recognized him from the pub, and they just knew he was always one of those guys who was, you want to take a seat with him if you were gonna have a few drinks in the evening. As he was entering that adult stage, though, him and his brother decided that they didn't want to follow their father's footsteps. They appreciated that he was a respected man, but he never really made much of himself, and he was always struggling, so they wanted more for themselves, and they left home to join the army. Life was going good. He was 19 years old. He was respected by his peers and superiors. While he was stationed in Ballina, he met his wife and they had 2 children, which seemed to be going good for a while. But after 7 years of marriage, he left his family and he moved to Scotland in 1818. There isn't concrete reason as to why, but it's speculated that he had a falling out with his wife's brother over some land and he just upped and left. He went to work on the Union Canal that was being built to connect Edinburgh to Falkirk. When he made his way to the village of Maddiston, I feel like I'm getting these names right, but I'm really getting them all wrong. He met a woman named Helen Mcdougall, who he nicknamed Nellie. Allegedly, Nellie was already married and she left her family to do sex work because there was a huge demand for men on the canal, so she figured she could make a lot of money that way, and then that's how she met William. When the canal was finished and there was no more work for him, they made their way to Edinburgh in 1827, and for money, they started repairing old clothes and shoes and then reselling them. Little did they know, William was going to meet another William very shortly, and their lives were going to change forever. His name was William Hare. There's very little known about his upbringing. It's believed he's around the same age as William Burke, also born in Ireland, believed to be from either the county Derry or Newry, and went to Scotland in 1818. He wasn't a well-educated man, and I guess the way I would describe him just from reading was, I think people described him as brash. It's speculated that he also did work on the canal. It's believed that he was doing work loading and unloading the boats, but there's no accounts that this is where Will and Will met. He was a fan of the booze, and when he was indulging in a lot, those abrasive personality traits would heighten. His desire to fight would heighten. I guess he was a very intimidating and mysterious man. He also met his partner when he moved to Edinburgh. She was the wife of the man that he was renting a lodging room from. He owned the lodging house. William was renting a room from the lodging house. It was called Tanner's Close. It had about 7 beds. And yeah, William just goes and starts having an affair with this guy's wife, and he finds out, kicks William out. But what do you know? The husband dies of natural causes very soon after this. So William moves back in, shacks up with the wife, and takes over the business, which is how Will and Will met. Will B and Nellie were looking for a place in 1827, and they found Tanner's Close. The men become bros right away, probably over the shared name initially. I guess their wives thought it was just wild that they didn't even know each other prior to meeting, because that's how instantly they connected. They were like long lost brothers. They fought like brothers, got made up like brothers. They both were fans of the bottles, so they would go out often, and a lot of people around town knew who they were. If they weren't out at a pub, they were usually at Tanner's Close, which is where they were on an evening in November 1827 when they meet a man named Mr. Donald. He came to rent a room at Tanner's Close. He's described as tall and meaty. He once was a soldier, but now in his later life, he kept very much to himself. He was collecting money through pension, and I guess for his November payment, something happened where it was delayed, but he was already staying at the lodge, and so William Hare had agreed that they would work it out when the payment came, and he was like, whenever you get paid, you can just like square up with me. That doesn't happen though, because on November 29th, he passes away. It appeared he died of natural causes. William found him in his bed, and he just thought he was sleeping and then realized he was dead. And I guess he was quite upset that he died before he was able to collect the rest of the money that he owed him. There's nothing that is written about whose idea this was, but obviously Will went to Will and was like, look it, this guy just like died on me here. He owes me money. And the topic came up that there were people in town that were making money by selling bodies that they would, come across to the medical school. They weren't really sure who around town knew Mr. Donald, though, and knew that he was staying there. So they had to come up with a plan to appear like they were like following protocol. So they call the proper authorities. They come out, pronounce Mr. Donald dead. They send the coffin over so that he can have like a proper burial and service for anybody who wants to come and say goodbye, which they do. But before the undertakers come to take the coffin away, they quickly take Mr. Donald out and they put a bunch of logs in there for weight. And then the coffin is taken with these logs, and that's what's buried. And they keep Mr. Donald and take him to the medical school. Initially, they went to the College of Surgeons, and I guess they went to the wrong place. And a student there said, you're better off if you take this to Dr. Knox over at the anatomy school, which was on Surgeon Square. They go over there. I guess it's daytime. They've got Mr. Donald in a sack. They go to the back door, and the assistant is like, can you come back at nighttime when it's dark? So they come back when the sun goes down, and they're so nervous. They're just like going over all of these scenarios in their head. Like, if they ask us this, what are we going to say this? And pretty much it's just like the door opens, they're let in. The assistants look over the body. They're like, yeah, everything looks good. Dr. Knox comes in the room, does the same, and he's just like, pay the men. They were paid £7, and that was it. Then they were just sent on their way. As they're being escorted out, one of the assistants says to them, keep us in mind if you ever have more merchandise, is what they called it. We'd be happy to take it off your hands. I can just imagine them leaving like Deuce Bigalow when he made his first $10.
Yeah!
This was apparently more money than either of them had ever had at one time. So they see a great opportunity for wealth here. Problem is, people who are staying at the lodge, they don't just die overnight. Well, I mean, Mr. Donald did, but it doesn't happen on the reg. So just like that, the idea goes from having opportunities laid out on their lap to creating them. And apparently they weren't wasting any time, because it's only a week later, the first week of December, that a beggar named Joseph becomes William William Ann Williams' first murder victim. He was staying at the lodge. I guess he had been there for a while. He got sick after Mr. Donald had passed, but I read that it wasn't anything life-threatening. He was just fighting a cough. Will and Will talk themselves into the idea that this poor man is suffering, though. They don't think that he can handle this cough, and the only humane thing to do is to put him out of his misery. I guess they went up to his room, drank a bunch of whiskey with him. It's been reported that there was some sort of opiate that was put in Joseph's whiskey because he falls asleep and never wakes up. It's also said that Burke assisted by suffocating him to make sure that it all went according to plan. After he's passed, they take him back to Dr. Knox's. They say they're not really sure what happened to him, but they knew that he was a drinker, and since he had just drank whiskey, the assistants can smell it on him. They're like, oh yeah, this happens. This time they're handed 10 pounds, and again, given the reminder, you know where to go if you come across anybody else. Now they didn't want to really source out their victims at Tanner's Close because, at the end of the day, it's still Will's business. Well, it wasn't always. But they figured, people would start asking questions like, why does stuff always happen there? So they started just, making useful time of their time in the pubs and, stalking people from there. One that I read that was mentioned is called White Hart Inn, which, like many pubs in Scotland, is still there today. Imagine sitting in some spot at a pub and a serial killer was in that same spot. They're just stalking the streets and the pub for their next victim, which is what they do. And on February 11th, 1828, they find Abigail Simpson. She was an elderly lady. Say it with me. Who do we not fuck with? Kids, animals, and the elderly. Abigail was a salt peddler who was now collecting pension. She popped into a pub just to have a little whiskey and sits next to William and William. Like so many sweet little old women, she just strikes up a conversation with them. She's even trying to play matchmaker by upselling her beautiful granddaughter that would be a perfect pair for one of the Williams. They chat for the entire evening until the pub closes, and then they suggest to her, let's take this social engagement over to Tanner's Close and keep drinking. And she is just so excited to meet her two new little friends that she agrees. They join their wives who are also at the lodge, and then all together, they also just get smashed. I read that they got so drunk, though, that they forgot what they were supposed to be doing, and they just passed out. So in the morning, they're like, well, we dropped the ball there. And you just wish that little Abigail would have woken up early and tiptoed out. But she also was suffering from a hangover, so she wakes up and they offer her more whiskey to, take the edge off, little hair of the dog. She apparently never was one to say no to a drink, so she agrees. And it just opens up the door for them to just keep offering more and more and more until it doesn't take very long for her to become in the same state that she was the night before. But this time they're monitoring their consumption. It's said that she passed out, and at this point, Will and Will's wives, who had been there the entire time and were well aware of what was going on, not wanting to be witnesses, left the room. And then Abigail was also suffocated. They take her to Dr. Knox. He gives the old, you know what to do. They make another 10 pounds and sent on their way. Their next victim was an Englishman from Cheshire. He came to stay at the lodge, and while he was there, he got sick and was showing signs of jaundice. And, they just figured they couldn't have a jaundice death at the establishment. It would ruin their business. So they think they've got no choice but to back to Dr. Knox, another 10 pounds. After him, it was another little old woman from Glimmerton that Mary Hare herself, Mary I Know Nothing Hare, brought her to the lodge and served her all drunk on a silver platter to her husband. As they're spending more time in the pubs, not just stalking their victims, but they're also drinking even more heavily, pretty much trying to just drink away the reality of what they were doing and what was going on. Mostly for Burke, I read that as they were becoming serial killers, not serial killers, Sherrilyn, they are fucking serial killers. I take that back. I know right now every other Friends fan is thinking of Joey being like, I'm sorry. Apparently Burke didn't take any pleasure in it like some serial killers do. Not that that makes it any different, but he was focused on like the goal. He was like a very like structured, goal orientated person, so he knew like there was a purpose for this, and it was that it was a financial goal. Again, like, okay, go make like pottery and sell it. William Hare allegedly did get a lot of enjoyment from it though. And during the whole ordeal, it would like channel this like excited rage in him. So I would say Burke was drinking to forget, Hare was drinking to like fuel. With these more frequent visits to the pubs, other regulars were noticing that they were always there. They were always drinking quite a lot, you know, racking up pretty large bills. And they knew that they weren't like anybody special. They didn't have like these flourishing careers to be able to sustain this lifestyle. They were also dressing a little bit better. So some people asked, you know, like just casually, like, oh, like you must be doing well, which you hoped would have been an opportunity for them to like just like stumble on themselves. But they say they came across a decent inheritance and they were doing pretty well now, and then no one really questioned it. I'm sure if they just stayed, you know, like on the low, stuck to their initial routine that they were doing, they probably would have never gotten caught. Good news is, though, they did start getting sloppy. Bad news is, it would take months for it to finally catch up with them, which means there were still more victims. April 9th seemed to be the turning point when William Burke just started going rogue. Water break. Ooh, I wonder how Marie did this. Let them drink Aquafina. Apparently she never said that. Well, obviously she never said Aquafina. They didn't fucking have Aquafina then, Sherrilyn. Apparently Marie Antoinette never said, let them eat cake. And neither did William Burke. He just went rogue. Did you like that little segue? Like I said, he was drinking a lot to just like forget what he was doing, and he meets a young woman named Mary Patterson and her friend Janet. They were both young women who were working the streets, and I guess they had had encounters with Will prior. So when he invites them to come and sit with him and have some drinks, they accepted, and then after they get pretty loosey-goosey, he invites them to his brother's house. Not like his brother, like my bro William, but like his actual brother who he came to Edinburgh with. Very off the beaten path of what normally happens. He's not with Will. He's at his brother's home. He's alone. I guess at first, even Janet, she was a little hesitant. She didn't really want to leave from the pub, but he convinced them. They get to his brother's. They're drinking quite a bit. Mary passes out, but Janet's just not biting. Like, she's not consuming as fast as Mary or William. She just had this gut feeling to just like keep it together, be in control. But she's in a tough spot because she's not really drinking, but she doesn't want to leave her friend either. So she's just like kind of sitting there waiting for Mary to wake up, and then all of a sudden, William's wife busts through the door, and she's just losing it that he's with these two women. I guess he kicks his wife out, and he's trying to like smooth the whole situation over. But Janet's like, I am not getting in the middle of this domestic here at all, so she leaves and says, I'm gonna come back for Mary. Within minutes, William takes this opportunity to just kill Mary before she can come back. And I guess Janet had a very good family friend that lived close by. She was a wealthy woman, and she went over there to kind of let her know what was going on and just see if she could hang out there for a bit and then go back and check on her friend. And this woman was like, I don't think you should leave your friend. How about you take my housemaid and have her, you know, like escort you, and you've got like backup, and you guys go and get married. They go back to the house and William's gone. During this time, he had called other Will and he was like, yo, I f***ed up, went rogue. I need your help. So Will H is there now, and he says, oh yeah, Mary, her and William, they just stepped out. They'll just be a minute. So Janet said, okay, I'll wait for her. Tells the woman who's with her that she doesn't need her to wait. She can go on back to the house and, you know, she'll touch base later. Meanwhile, Mary is there. She's in the other room and she's dead. Thank goodness this lady who was a family friend of Janet's lived close though, because the maid makes it back there and she's like, where's Janet? And she's like, oh, she's just waiting for her friend. Her friend left. She's coming back. She sent me here. And she's like, no. You got to go back and get her. Like, insist that she comes back with you, Mary or not. So she hauls her ass back there, goes and tells Janet, like, you have to leave with me. She's insisting. I need you to come back so, like, I don't get in trouble. So Janet's like, okay, I'm coming back for Mary. After they leave, Will rush Mary to the school so that they don't run into another opportunity where she's going to be found by Janet. This time they experience another situation that they hadn't before, and that is when they get to Dr. Knox's, one of the students recognizes Mary. He had done business with her before, so on his feet, Will B is like, oh, we don't really know anything about her. We actually have a connection on the streets, and it was this little old woman who just came across her body and found her. When we got there, she, smelled of alcohol, so we just kind of figured she might have drank herself to death, and we didn't ask questions, so we can't really answer any for you. And they're like, oh, okay, yeah, since they do smell alcohol because she was being fed so much, they didn't question it, and they gave them another 10 pounds. It's so sad because Janet never stopped looking for her friend. She even ran into William's brother once, and he made her feel so small for even asking. He basically said to her, like, how would I know where your friend is? Like, with the lifestyle that you two live in, you're here one minute, gone the next, and just made her just feel so helpless. After this, they just kind of both started down this reckless path where they got to the point that they even started losing track of the number of victims. William Burke remembers around this time luring another old woman known as Old Effie back to the lodge. I guess she was an associate of his back in the day, back when he was repurposing shoes and clothing. He would buy leather from her, so they did business together. And now at this point in her life, she was homeless, so he invites her back to the lodge to have a nice warm meal, which was code for, I'm gonna kill you. How heartless are you? Next was an intoxicated woman that was found on the streets. I guess the police were arriving just as William Hare was. And he tells them, oh, don't worry, I know her. I've got this under control. You guys can leave. So they do. You know the drill. Back to Dr. Knox's. After her, in June 1928, another old woman from the streets and her 12-year-old grandson, who was deaf, were the next victims. They were lost and they were looking for directions. Will direct them right to the lodge. They made 8 pounds per body. Apparently, the team at the university didn't even bat a lash at a 12-year-old boy being brought there. They were just like, yep, okay, see you next time. Their next victim was a woman named Miss Osler, who was working as a laundry woman at another lodge that now William Burke was living at. Apparently, the family that owned this lodge was throwing a dinner party, and he drags her into this other room and he kills her while this dinner party is going on. And if that's not brazen enough, the next victim was Anne Mcdougall, who was visiting her cousin Helen Mcdougall, who was none other than William Burke's wife. Yeah, suffocated, his own wife's cousin. And no one in the family suspected a thing because Helen just says oh, yeah, she was supposed to come, but she never made it. So they assumed she went missing along the way somewhere else. After Cousin Anne, they go right back to work. They meet an elderly woman named Mary. She was also working on the streets, and she was very flattered that William Burke was interested in her services. By this point, we already know what he's actually interested in. The problem for them with Mary is that they expected that since she was an elderly sex worker, she couldn't possibly have any family that was checking in or cared or loved her. But her daughter Peggy also worked the streets and kept in constant contact with her mother, always knew the locations that she was going to be at. And when she couldn't find her, she started looking. She got wind that the last place her mother was seen was walking to the lodge where William Hare lived. So she goes there, pounding on the door. Helen opens the door. She says she doesn't know what she's talking about, hoping that's going to be enough to like send Peggy away. But Peggy is like, I am not leaving. Suddenly, William shows up and he's like, oh, yes, yeah, your mother was here. She's left though. How can we help you? We want to help. You know, like, come on in. Oh, your mother's so lovely. Here, have a seat. Can I get you some whiskey? And she's like, oh, yeah, sure. You know, like kind of feeling a little bit embarrassed now because he's being so lovely to her. Door closes, pours a whiskey. She meets the same fate as her mother. The thing with these two women is that they really underestimated their occupation to meaning that they weren't valued. And that's a lesson to anybody who feels that somebody in the sex industry is not a real person or isn't valued or isn't loved by somebody or doesn't have a family or isn't human. Because these women were a bright light in many people's lives and their absence was quickly noticed. Family was starting to ask questions. Word on the street was starting to pick up. The walls were closing. Unfortunately, it wasn't fast enough. In October, James Wilson was their second last victim. He was an 18-year-old who, again, was very well known in the area. He was a little sweetheart. He was known to a lot of people because he had some mental limitations, and it made him very endearing around town. He often would be taken in by the locals and given a warm meal, but for the most part, he lived on the streets. Apparently, he ran away from home when he was a really young boy because he had gotten in trouble and his mom punished him and he ran away and he was never able to find his way back home. Oh, my heart. He had been on the streets since he was 12 and allegedly he was always looking for his mother. So William Hare tells him, oh, she rents a suite from us at the lodge. He brought him there. He's all excited. Apparently, he tried to subdue him by getting him to drink whiskey like the other victims, but Jamie wasn't a drinker. He said he was just gonna like sit and wait for his mom. So this was another case where they went off the usual routine, if you will, and took someone's life who was, you know, like fully aware and not incapacitated. It required a lot of strength from both men, but unfortunately, they were able to overpower Jamie, and he was next to arrive at Dr. Knox's door. It's been said that Jamie was another cadaver that was recognized by students at Dr. Knox's, and when they tried to question what happened, I guess Dr. Knox tried to downplay it, first saying, oh, no, I don't think it's who you think it is, gaslighting them. And I guess during this time, because they wouldn't just like bring the bodies to Dr. Knox and then like instantly they were being transported to like the table in front of all of these students right away. Like there was a certain period of time that they would like wait before they would get to them. So allegedly during this lapse in time, Jamie's mother finds out that he's been looking for her and she's looking for him. And now this is like a big thing, like word on the street is going around. So Dr. Knox quickly is like, okay, well, like I've got to use this cadaver first now. And since Jamie has like identifiable features, like he had feet that were disfigured and people recognized his face, he got rid of those identifiable features and then used his body to demonstrate on in front of the class. Blech. What the f*** is wrong with people? What the f*** is wrong with people? Last on Halloween of 1828, Mary Dougherty was their last victim. I just realized that I feel like there's a lot of Marys. I guess the morning of the 31st, William is at Reimer's Tavern. While he's there having a whiskey, Mary walks in. She's in there not to have a drink though. She's just asking for spare change and Will is like, of course, I got you. He even says to her, you know, like, not only will I give you some spare change, but why don't you come and have a seat and I'll pay for you to have a drink and keep me company. She agrees, and while they're talking, she says that she's originally from Ireland, and he's like, oh, my wife is also from Ireland and you guys share the same last name. You must be cousins. So he invites her to come back to meet his wife. She's stoked. She goes with him because he says, let's go have some more drinks with your long lost cousin. And she sadly dies the same way as all of the others. Thankfully, this time, there was a couple who were friends with Burke, and they also were friends with Mary, and they had just happened to catch a glimpse of her going there the night before. So they start asking questions. Helen initially tells them like, oh yeah, she did come here, but she was flirting with William, so I kicked her out. Like, I don't know where she went. Something about the way she told the story, though, was just off to them, and they're like, no. They barge through the house, start looking in all of the rooms, and they find her body hidden under some straw in the basement. I guess Helen falls to her knees. She's all like distraught. Not denying anything, though. She's asking them if she can pay them £12 a week for them to be quiet. And they're like, hell no. Which, thank goodness, because where's she going to come up with £12 a week? It's pretty safe to say she's assuming that her husband and his partner are going to just like kick things up a notch so that they can like offset the hush money by bringing more bodies to the school. In the time that this couple went to alert authorities, though, Will rushed Mary to the school. By the time they came back to the neighborhood, though, authorities were questioning like everybody in the street. There was like a huge commotion going on. Will and Will's wives were being questioned, but they just couldn't get their story straight, so instantly all of them were arrested. Someone also tips off the police that they think Mary, if she's not in the house, might be at the university. So they quickly head over there to go question Dr. Knox, and they find Mary. Dr. Knox is, again, like Helen, like all like, oh, what's going on here? He admits that he has been doing business with the Wills for about a year, but that he always did his due diligence and like asked the proper questions. He said that he believed that these men had deals worked out with other people on the street that they were associated with who would contact Will and Will. They would go pick up the body and then bring it to Dr. Knox. Everybody in town goes into a frenzy naturally because anybody who had a missing family member automatically is assuming that Will and Will had something to do with it. It made it really hard though because there were no bodies left to identify. All of the evidence had been disposed of. In some cases, like Janet's, who was the woman who never stopped looking for her friend Mary, there were items of the victims that were left behind at the tavern, and then their family members and loved ones were able to identify them, which Janet was thankfully able to do to just put some closure to Mary's disappearance. But again, since this was so complex in terms of just not having evidence, authorities felt the only decision they had was to make a deal with the devil, if you will. So William Hare was offered full immunity for a confession and his cooperation. Since the wives were also arrested when Will and Will were, his wife becomes exempt because he can't testify against her, so she also gets released. He makes a full confession, he admits his involvement, and he also implicates William Burke right alongside him. William Burke and his wife were charged with 3 murders, the murders of the victims that the students had identified at the school, which were Mary Patterson, James Wilson, and Miss Dougherty. A lot of people had their eyes on Dr. Knox as well. They also felt like he, although he wasn't directly killing anybody, was turning a blind eye and had to have known what was going on. But William Burke wrote a formal statement saying that at no time did Dr. Knox ever ask or insinuate that he wanted them to take lives of these victims. So he was never charged, but his reputation did tank after this. Understandable. People are like, really? Like you just never question them? Like the same 2 guys are coming pretty much like every other week. You just believe they just like stumble across these like fresh bodies all the time? Stop. After the trial, Burke was sentenced to death. His wife was found not guilty due to lack of evidence. And when the judge handed him his sentence, he said, "Your body should be publicly dissected. And I trust that if it is ever customary to preserve skeletons, yours will be preserved, in order that posterity may keep in remembrance your atrocious crimes." William Burke was hung on the morning of January 28th, 1929. Why do I keep saying 1829. I guess this was a huge event. Like everybody watched it in the town. They were watching in the windows. And on the 1st of February, his body was publicly dissected. It was done by a professor named Professor Monroe. I guess so many students wanted to attend this dissection that tickets were handed out and you had to buy them, and then like a riot ensued when certain students couldn't get into the theater to watch. I mean, if you pay the crime, do the time. If you do the crime, you gotta pay the time. What the? If you do the crime, if you do the crime, you do the time. pay the time? Hey Siri, how does the saying go? Is it if you do the crime, you pay the time? Siri? Hello, Siri? Is it if you do the crime, you pay the time? Oh yeah, I'm way off. Like, no wonder it was sounding weird. If you can't do the time, don't do the crime. Is what I was trying to say. Afterwards, Burke's skeleton was given to the Anatomical Museum in the Edinburgh Medical School, where as of 2018, I read it still is there. I also read that his death mask and a book said to be bound in his skin can be seen at Surgeons Hall Museum. So I guess if you guys ever find yourselves there, you might come across it. Dare I say I almost feel bad for William Burke? Not like feel bad for him. Obviously, he was a piece of trash and appropriately sentenced and punished. But the only one to be found guilty of doing all of this, like, it just does not sit right with me. I just feel like a deal that quick to make sure that only one person was found guilty, like, was it worth it? I feel like it was just made too quick and that eventually one of them would have cracked and just like come clean and confessed without a deal. I don't know. What do you guys think? And how do we feel about the doctor? Like, these two weren't the only two that were coming to him with bodies. Can you imagine how many other people were supplying him with merchandise, like he liked to call it? I mean, I get that he didn't say like, oh, please kill people and bring them here. But just the implication of like, oh, pleasure doing business with you. If you come across more, like, you know where to go and you will be paid appropriately. It's pretty much like saying it without saying it. I want to know your guys' thoughts. As always, though, that is it for me today, you guys. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. If I could ask, maybe just take like a little peek, double check that you are. I'm not putting any pressure on you whatsoever, but according to my analytics, 48% of my regular viewers are not subscribed. And I'm not saying that I think that it's because you guys don't want to be or anything. I see so many times where people will say like, oh my God, I thought I've been subscribed the whole time and I wasn't, so I just did. And I'm like, okay, thank you. So if you want to just double check, I would be unbelievably grateful. That 100K milestone is just so close. And if you're comfortable just being unsubscribed for the time being, that's okay too. I still love you. But you know, like I figured I'd ask. Oh, and the answer to the riddle, just a reminder of what it was. A serial killer kidnaps people and makes them take one of two pills. He says one is harmless and one is poisonous. Whichever pill the victim chooses, he will take the other. Each victim took their pills, drank their water, and died. But every time, the killer survived. How did the killer always get the harmless pill? And the answer is both pills were harmless. It was the water that the victim drank that was poisoned. All right, you guys, I will see you in the next video. I will miss you terribly until then. Make sure to love each other, love yourself, and I will see you soon. Bye.